In the last several days, we've been looking at Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And we've looked at the first 5 habits, but today the 6th habit is one that if we can learn it and apply it to our lives, we are going to have such a superior life than if we don't learn this habit. So what is it? He refers to it in this way: synergize. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Well, if you're like me, when you first looked at that, it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, the way he uses the word synergy is this. It's like a recipe. If you're baking a cake, a chocolate cake, you're going to need a number of different ingredients. You're going to need chocolate. You're going to need sugar. Or cocoa, sugar. You're going to need flour and eggs, and then they're going to have to be mixed together correctly, and then they're going to have to be baked in the right way for the right time. This is synergy. It's when you get everything working together towards a common goal. In this case, a delicious chocolate cake. Well, there are some parts of this that don't make as much sense to us, though. How can the whole be greater than the sum of the parts? We have a wise old cowboy at the church that I worship at. He's an expert horseman, although I doubt if he would admit to this himself. But one of his hobbies is watching horse pulls. I don't know if he's been to any in person, but he's watched them on TV. And he talked about how horses can actually pull more when they're working together. As an example, a horse that could pull 3,000 pounds on a sled by himself, and take another horse, a second horse, that could do the same, 3,000 pounds by himself. Well, how much would you expect them to pull if they were harnessed together, pulling the same load? And the answer, to me, the mathematician in me, says 6,000 pounds. But that's wrong, because working together in the same harness, pulling the same load, these two horses, instead of being able to pull twice as much as they could individually, might be able to pull 8, 9, 10,000 pounds together. Well, why is that? Well, it's the same as we human beings. When we're working together, when we're sharing a common burden, it becomes easier. Part of it's just the mental aspect. We're not doing this all by ourselves, but the camaraderie and the this idea of working together is very important. It's really important in the church. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, God had Paul write this, starting in verse 12. The body is a unit, though it's made up of many parts, and though all its parts are many, they form one body. So it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit into one body. He's talking about the church here, isn't he? And then he goes on and he talks about the fact that since the body's not made up of one part but of many, that these parts need to be working together. The hand can't think that it's more important than the foot. The head cannot go anywhere without the feet. We need in our bodies for their bodies to be functioning together as one. I can't be reaching for a screwdriver over here while my feet are carrying me off in the different direction. We have to be synchronized. It has to be done together or the body doesn't work. And even the parts that you don't see are important. We can see the hand, we can see the foot and the head, but we can't see the lungs or the kidneys. Does that mean the lungs and the kidneys are not as important? No. Try and live without them and you'll find out that they are. And so all the parts, whether they are given the honor of being on the outside or whether they're being hidden and protected on the inside, are necessary. And it's the same way with the church. We need to be working together towards the common goals that God has for us. We're not going to be saved as a group. That's still an individual thing. But it's so much easier to obtain salvation if we're helping one another get to that point. We can see this in a lot of different areas of our physical life, can't we? Most of us have played on a sports team, and we've seen how important it is for that team to be working together as one towards the same goal. If you've ever seen a basketball team that's got really good athletes, but they all seem to be just working as individuals, they're just five ball hogs on the same team that are trying to score as many points as they can for their own glory, well, that team's not going to be nearly as effective as a group of five other athletes who may not even be as talented on an individual basis, but working together, they can accomplish so much more because they're trying to have success for the team, not for the individual. Synergy is something that we see sometimes within the business world. Take an example of two men that have a dream to own their own taxi cab, but they just don't have enough money to do that. But if they combine their money and they use that taxi cab for different shifts during the day, then they're going to be able to afford that taxi cab, and they're still going to be able to have the same amount of time behind the wheel making the same amount of money that they would have if they just were using it for 8 hours a day by themselves and parking it for another 8 hours. And in addition to that, they're actually going to have a greater profit because they're sharing the cost of the cab. And while certainly it will depreciate at a faster rate, the other portions of the cab, such as the license for the cab and other expenses, will be shared together. And so in this case, the synergy, the two working together as one, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. They can accomplish things they could not accomplish on their own. Well, God saw this from the very beginning. This is not a magical trait that somehow Stephen Covey or anybody else discovered on their own. God's been talking about this since the creation. You remember at the very beginning, after he had created man, what he said? He said, "It's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Do you think that God didn't know that before he created the man, that this was just somehow a recent epiphany that he had after observing the creation? Well, I suspect he knew full well that the man needed a helper, because when he created the animals, he created them in pairs, male and female. It was the man who had to see that his life was not nearly as good by himself as it was with a helpmeet. And so now he had a standard, a basis for comparison. He had tried it alone, and it just wasn't as good as it was once he had Eve beside him to help him do the work. Well, there in Proverbs, or Solomon, or in Ecclesiastes, King Solomon said that two are better than one. And we see that in so many different areas. Now, I would agree that there are some things that it is better for us to do alone. It's better for me to tie my shoe alone than to have a team of 7 people trying to help me tie that shoe. I enjoy eating a meal by myself, at least what's on the plate in front of me. I might like to eat with other people for the companionship, but I want to eat what's on my plate. And it's easier if I'm doing that than if a bunch of people are trying to stick a different forkful of food in my mouth at the same time. And so there are some things it's better for us to do alone, but think about even these areas. Didn't we still need a team of people to get us to that point? There's quite a bit of things that go into the making of a shoe and a shoelace, for everything from the manufacturing process to the packaging to the selling to the delivery of it. It took a lot to get that shoe in our hands so that we could put it on our foot and tie it, didn't it? It took a lot of people, from the farmer to the transporters to the processors to the storekeepers, to get that food on the plate in front of us so that we could eat it by ourselves. So this synergy still works in just about any area that you can think about. One of the greatest areas I think that's ever been discovered as far as how effective it was by Henry Ford when he used the assembly line for the production of automobiles. He wasn't the one that invented the assembly line, but he could see its advantage when making a car. A car that might take one person hundreds of hours to put together by himself could now be put together by a group of 100 people, maybe in an hour, or maybe less than that time. And with them working together, one person fastening the bolts on the engine, another person putting the tire on, another person working on the upholstery, they could get that car put together so much quickly, and then they could turn around to the next car that was coming down that assembly line and do the same thing. To where at the end of the day, you might have 100 cars sitting out there as opposed to waiting several weeks for one person to be able to get that same single car out. The whole really is greater than the sum of the parts. And the reason is because we need each other to be the most effective in our lives. God saw that from the very beginning. Do we see it? Well, I think you and I have both been able to see the consequences for not working together in our own nation. It seems like half the people are working against the other half of the people. I remember in the state I live in Texas, in the last few years, one part of the government has been fighting to keep the borders wide open, while another part of the government has been fighting to keep the borders closed. And so I pay state taxes for one thing, to close the borders, and I pay federal taxes to open the borders. It's insane. If the two would be working together towards what was needed, we could do so much better. And yet it seems like our leaders have determined it's best for us to be divided so they can rule a little bit easier. I hope we can get past that at some point. I hope we can see what the earliest of Americans saw from the very beginnings when this nation was being founded. We're going to have to work together in order to be successful and in order to produce something that's worthwhile. This is true in marriage. It's true in a sports team. It's true in business. It's true in a nation. And it's especially true within the church. Again, we're not working towards a collective salvation where we'll all be saved or we'll all be lost, but we can help one another towards that individual goal for each one of us to have what we need so that we can be saved, so that we can come in contact with God's grace and with Christ's shed blood. And when we're working together as a body, functioning together smoothly as a unit, the things that we can accomplish are incredible. In addition to that, we have the fellowship of one another, the joy of close companionship with each other. And we have the satisfaction of a job well done when we're all pitching in towards a good and a common cause. This is the way that God designed the church. It is true, very true, that we have our individual parts and that we get to choose for ourselves what those individual parts are. It's not like communism where somebody chooses for you. You get to do that. There is freedom within Christ. But if we can take the things that we long to do and that we do well and combine them with the things that others long to do and do well, we can accomplish a lot for Christ and for His church. And it will work well that way. The sixth principle of highly effective people is to synergize, because the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We really do need each other. Well, thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate it. I've had fun looking at this particular one. I hope it's something that interests you as well and that you can apply to your life. But until next time, I pray that God will richly bless us as we seek together to serve Him to the very best of our ability. God bless.